welcome to Courage Keepers and our Courageous Conversations. And this is the first in a series of mental health and peace building conversations. And today we are celebrating World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. And this event today is actually an Operation Big Sister event. So I want to thank you very much for joining us. We have two amazing Courage Keepers that are present. One of them is Lana Smith. And Lana is a health advocate that I've known for quite a while. She's done amazing things with health and wellness and a lot of wonderful things to help families unite and children be united with families. And so I think we've got a wonderful expert that'll be talking to us about trauma and her experiences in Cambodia and Thailand. Our next Courage Keeper that we will talk more about is Akaleke Christian Leke, and he has a dossier that is so amazing and incredible that I will have to go into more detail when I talk about him a little bit later. But he is a peace builder that I have been following online, because as an attorney who works with youth and especially at-risk youth, I am extremely impressed with what Christian has been doing with restorative justice and helping prevent violent extremism by helping rehabilitate prisoners and people who have gone through terrible, terrible troubles, especially in youth. Christian is actually oversees over 1,000 youth groups for the Commonwealth. So we'll talk about Christian a little bit more, but thank you so much for being here. And I really want to present to you that today is a day of hope. Today is going to be a day where we're going to not just talk about a problem and do an awareness raising, but we're also going to give some practical ideas and solutions for people to be able to help end human trafficking. And we'll start with a video of a trafficking survivor. And this video is put up by, it will be found on the Operation Big Sister website for anyone who would be interested in doing a event. So hopefully we'll have our video coming up. Here we go.
Into human trafficking. And we drove to this dead-end street, and he turned the car around, and we were parked on the side of the curb, and he said, you know, I've spent a lot of money to get you here. I've put first and last on the apartment. I rented the U-Haul. I filled the fridge with food, furniture, and we're going to need to get that money back because that's money I was using for my business. And part of me felt obligated, like I felt guilty that I had used this man that I love's money that I didn't know he didn't have. And so I said, okay, like, of course I'll help you get the money back. Do I need to get a job? Like, what is the plan? And he said, well, actually, this is an escort service. And he pointed through the window. He said, I'm going to need you to go inside and sign up. And he started saying, don't worry, this isn't anything like the movies make it seem. It's just dancing in a room. And, don't act like you've never worn a bikini at a pool, or, it's not like you're a virgin when I met you. He said stuff like that. And I was like, what do you mean, like escort, though? Like prostitution? And it was at that point that he slapped me across the face and said, this is how it works here. We got a call right away. The service started calling him immediately, and he'd drive me from location to location. He would take every dollar. He would tell me what to say. And the abuse began. The beatings began. The control began. The coercion, the manipulation. I mean, the definition of human trafficking is force, fraud, or coercion, and moving to another city on fraudulent pretenses is the definition of it. I don't care if you're 15, 12, or 18 years old, it's still fraud. And then the coercion and the force obviously was immediate. It ended up being nearly 6 years that I was trafficked. During that time, I was sold between 3 different traffickers. I was branded twice, was hospitalized for dehydration and overexhaustion, had my face broken 5 times. I've been arrested over 7 times. I mean, it was severe 6 years of my life that I never knew if I was going to live or die every day. Just constant fear. Why didn't you just run? They expect us to grab a grenade, bomb the Bellagio, jump out the window, run, right? Like we're Angelina Jolie in some spy movie. But real life doesn't work like that. And my answer usually is, I did run. Why do you think I'm here, sitting with you here today? One thing I would love to say to men is, we need you. We need men to stand up. This can't just be a women's issue.
Hello, nice to see you. We've got you on now. Very good.
Yes, I'm sitting outside. Actually, I had to sit outside because inside the internet was not the best. So I'm actually outside, but that's cool.
Wonderful. Well, we've just seen a video about a trafficking victim, and we're going to discuss a little bit about the business of human trafficking now. I'm going to go ahead and tell, I guess, for the purposes of our meeting, I'm going to give us some general information on trafficking, and we're going to talk a little bit about 80 very brave Icelandic women who changed the laws of their country in a very humorous and powerful way. And the Big Sister story is one that can give us hope that there's lots of ways in which the average person can help in ending human trafficking. I'm going to give a little bit of a background on human trafficking. I would like to get your opinions about what you saw on the video. But think about this. Think that a lot of us, according to the former United States President Jimmy Carter, human trafficking is the greatest human rights violation in the history of humanity. Not only is it a human rights violation, it is also an international multi-billion-dollar industry operating all across the globe. As a matter of fact, I just read something recently that says that it is a greater business than arms trafficking or any other corporate business venture because of the multi-billion-dollar industry it does. Now, in the United States, we think it happens in foreign countries, but the FBI has documented that there's sex trafficking in all 50 states. One Operation Big Sister's partners, a prosecutor with the FBI in Marin, California, has said, if there is a motel or a hotel in your neighborhood, there is child sex trafficking. So it's probably happening in your community right now. So what I'd like for us to do is to take a moment right now and think about a girl or a woman that we love and care about, maybe a daughter, a sister, a wife, a grandmother, or a friend, and get in touch with how much you care about that person. And then I want you to think about one of your favorite moments with them. Imagine what we were doing with that favorite moment. Maybe playing with them. Imagine what they were doing when they were 9 or 10 or 12 years old. And so when you picture them playing or having a birthday celebration and enjoying life, it's a nice memory. But now I want you to turn and imagine that by the time they were 12 years old, they were being sold for sex. Here's a terrible statistic that's come out. And some of these statistics, I hate to say, are even older than they need to be. They're not all 2019 statistics, so they may be actually worse than now than they are in the date of the statistic. But the average age a teen enters sex trade in the United States is 2 to 14 years old. And in the world, it's even younger. It's 9 years old. Human trafficking into and within the United States, where we got that. The average lifespan of a victim is reported to be 7 years. So you can be found dead from an attack, abuse, HIV, STDs, malnutrition, overdose, or suicide. And these are some of the child trafficking statistics. So Lana, I'm going to start with you first. You won't do your presentation, but I just wanted your reflections on what you felt about the video about the woman that you just saw.
Well, first of all, I love that she had the courage and was able to escape. The thing is that with the victims, they're either born into the trafficking, where they've been raised with a mother or grandmother who is trafficked, or they're aged into it. Kind of like this girl was just, it sounds like it was someone that she knew, and she was at an age and he took advantage, and it was really beyond her control. And then there are also others that are cultivated into the trafficking, and it's hard to listen to what they suffer, and the constant fear that they, like Ashley lives in, or that she lived in during that period. She described not knowing if she was going to wake up dead or alive. She never knew.
Yes. Yes,
and
that is part of what we're talking about today. When we talk about human trafficking, we aren't only going to specifically talk about sexual trafficking, although that is the most pervasive, because the majority of what we see happening in the world really affects women to a very large percent. I do want to add the statistic that 30% of the human trafficking that goes around in the world are our children, and some as young as 5. I'm going to go ahead and let us see a message of hope, though, and that is the message of the Big Sisters. And Caroline, if you can put up our video on the Big Sisters, I'd appreciate that. And this is a message of hope, I believe.
So my name is Sheva Carr, and I am so delighted to be here today with my dear friend and partner, Fred Fuchs. We're partners on a project called Operation Big Sister. I brought Fred this incredible story that I heard at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women about an empowered group of Icelandic women who joined forces, everyday women, housewives, graduate students, people like me, who decided that they wanted to do something about modern-day slavery and the sex trade. We're going to tell their story in an entertaining feature film called Operation Big Sister, after the Big Sisters.
The Big Sisters is a group of anonymous women, feminists in Iceland, that didn't accept that we had a flourishing prostitution going on. We had a law that forbid to buy women, but the law was not implemented. The police didn't react.
I'm not going to tell you who I am. That's not because I'm afraid of anything. It is because I think that the Big Sister, the effect of the Big Sister is more if many of us are anonymous.
And we're also going to do a companion documentary so you can meet the real women who did this and other people like them who are making a difference. And this will give birth to a digital education platform that we're building as an offshoot of the 2 films to help people in all different sectors of society know how, with no personal risk, they can contribute to ending human trafficking and modern-day slavery.
Sex trafficking is such a horrific subject. It's very hard to present in the media. Most people are not open to or would want to see interviews or images or conversations. As you know, many of the girls involved in sex trafficking are 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. The idea of creating an entertainment film is to try to bring awareness of this subject to a large audience who don't go to documentary films, who won't read these types of political stories or follow them in the news.
We had tried all the usual things, what we were supposed to do, and it didn't matter. And therefore, we decided to do something about it.
I am just one of these women. I am an activist. I'm a feminist activist, and I took part in this because there was this situation of having enough.
I had lost a good friend of mine that had been in prostitution and gave up. So it was impossible for us just to sit and whine about the situation. We started to put in ads in where prostitution is sold. Of course, the buyers need to be anonymous, so it happens on the internet, or they buy unregistered phones, and we did the same. We put in ads in the newspaper and on the internet.
We just had enough. Some of us started talking. It just happened.
As soon as a new ad was put in, many men showed their interest. I think it took an hour to maybe get about 100 men. And the younger we acted, the more exciting we were. And in the beginning, we said to those wanting to buy us, don't you know that buying women in Iceland is criminal? Big Sister is watching you. And this was meant to scare them away from buying women. This was a hard work because it was difficult to sell oneself and use the lingo they use in prostitution.
If we would all come out and tell our names, it would be easier for them to start again. I think it is important that we stay anonymous, at least many of us.
I tried to sell myself over the phone, and the client asked, how old are you? He said, well, I'm 32, I said, and they didn't want to buy that, but that's how we did this. And we gathered the names of men, their phone numbers and emails, and suddenly we had done what the police said they were not going to do.
I think it was an eye-opener to us. We hear a very loud message from the people that we serve, that they want more justice to victims of sexual crimes.
I thought the Operation Big Sister was so clever, and it just shows the power of women and creativity.
Yes.
They knew enough to keep safe, but they challenged the system. They got a result. It was fabulous. It was absolutely, I wish I would have thought of it myself.
It's one example of where, when the community recognizes that there's a problem, there's somebody out there thinking outside the box. And guess what? It was a great box. They jumped out of it, put the suspects in it, gift wrapped it, and gave it to law enforcement. Heck of an idea.
So that is a short idea of what the ladies in Iceland did. We'll have a little cartoon video in just a little bit that kind of gives it a little bit more specific. But basically, humor was added as a way to fight this situation. And I think when we talk about mental health and peace building, I want to talk a little bit about what all of us who are involved in peace building need to do to protect ourselves as we face very difficult challenges, listening to stories of violence, violent extremism, trafficking, and what we must do to be able to protect ourselves from secondary trauma, from hearing these very difficult stories. And for that reason, I have invited Lana Smith to be our first presenter. Lana is a health advocate. She's a health and wellness advocate. She's been one for decades. And she just recently went to Chiang Mai, Thailand, and Siem Reap, Cambodia. I don't know if I'm saying that right. And she went as part of a clinical counseling team from a Master's of Counseling program at Liberty University. And her purpose to go there was to teach NGO workers about the neuroscience of trauma and trauma counseling. So she'll be talking to us a little bit about about psychological first aid, its purpose, and how we need to have self-care to help prevent burnout and secondary trauma when we help victims of trafficking. So she'll be talking about both points of view, what happens to the victim of trafficking, and then also what we as peace builders can do to help ourselves when we deal with them. The video that we just saw had a friend of mine, Sheva Carr, and Sheva is the person who is pretty much precipitating our Big Sister discussion and awareness event today. So a big shout out to Sheva Carr, Fiera, Heart Ambassadors, and Big Sisters for helping us. The Big Sisters, when they got together and finally were able to convince the police department that they had to do something, celebrated with champagne. And they've offered us to get a glass of champagne and celebrate. I don't drink, so I have a glass here, and I raise my toast with sparkling water to all of us who are going to work hard to prevent human trafficking from going on in this world. So Lana, to you.
Let me unmute myself. Deborah, thank you so much for having me on. It is a pleasure to get to take a few moments to share the experience that I just had. As part of a clinical counseling team, there were 26 of us that went, both master's level and PhD level students, along with our guiding professors. And the purpose of our trip was to work with the different NGOs who actually interface and work with the rescued or the sex trafficked survivors. The thing that we need to, that I feel is really important, is to understand what happens to these victims within their brains, the neuroscience, just the neuroscience part of it. As you can kind of look at your brain kind of like a fist here, where this is your brain stem, and the brain stem is responsible for just the automatic responses like breathing and your heart and just some of those normal things. And then in here is your limbic system, and we're born with that. And the limbic system controls your fight, flight, or freeze reactions to things, and as well as your rest and digest. So it's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. Also in there is the amygdala and the hippocampus and the just all the parts of the limbic system that work. What happens with trauma is that limbic system is constantly activated, where the sympathetic nervous system is on overdrive. When that happens, it releases, dumps cortisol and other hormones into the body, which creates a physiological response. As that happens over and over, it becomes difficult to access the higher cortex of the brain. So the more people are, exposed to trauma or victims of trauma, the harder it is for them to access that, the higher cortex, which is where the logic and the rational and the relationships exist. That's the part of the brain. So what we want to do is to help the NGOs help the girls learn how to do things that would create those new neural pathways, out of the limbic system up into the higher cortex. So we spent several days in both Chiang Mai and in Siem Reap discussing the neuroscience and teaching psychological first aid and then the basics of self-care. So with the psychological first aid, it's really important to, let me pull some of this up. First of all, there are some clinical features that the girls will have, or anyone really in crisis, but they will have some kind of somatic distress. They'll have some kind of a physical ailment, stomach aches, headaches, nausea. They often will feel extreme guilt. Like the first video, she how guilty she felt. They'll often have feelings of hostility. Their thinking is very disorganized. You won't be able to follow them, their pattern of thinking. Their behavior will be erratic. And then they also, especially those that have, whatever they've seen, the physical violence, they will kind of have a preoccupation with some of those images. So this really is, we can refer to this as kind of a trauma brain, a reactive or the trauma brain, where the girls are in that constant fight or flight. And you can kind of see just with some of the pictures that Big Sisters organization put up, you can see where they're kind of, they're shut down there. So first of all, with the psychological first aid, there's really a few components that are very important. The first is to create a sense of safety. I mean, much the same way with physical first aid, physically they go to stabilize the patient. Psychologically, the stabilization that has to happen is really a feeling of helping them feel safe. These girls or these victims are not going to have a lot of trust for people, for anyone. And so we need to, as we interface with them, help them feel safe. We can do that by just providing emotional comfort, by being compassionate. We refer to it as just sitting well. Caroline, there's a slide about, sitting well with someone that is in trauma or someone that has been rescued. So sitting well with someone is about letting them experience the pain they're going through. And I know that, we want to rescue, but the most important thing is to sit with them and let them cry, let them experience whatever pain they are experiencing. As we do that is exactly what will help them have the courage to move out of that. That as we do that, we need to be calm ourselves, which we will get into the self-care, because it's very easy to slip into a burnout phase or the vicarious or secondary trauma. Especially as you are working in this field over and, on a consistent basis, you hear so much. And you need to be careful that you don't become the one in crisis where you're having the features of the crisis. So we need to create calm. We need to connect with the individuals in a very non-intrusive way. This is not the time to get their stories. This is the time to just be calm and sit with them. Within the brain, we have what they call mirror neurons, where if I can keep myself calm, that calm will transfer to the person that I'm with. Now, vice versa can be true as well. So it's really whoever can hold the stronger position, that's the neurons that will be mirrored. And as clinical workers, we want to be very well grounded, and that's why the self-care is so important, so that when we sit well with someone, we can mirror the calmness that we have cultivated within ourselves. We need to create self and collective efficacy. We need to empower the individual to focus on safety. They need to see that they're safe. They need to focus on the present, what is happening right here and right now. As we do that, we start to create a connection, which is another part of the psychological first aid. As we create that connection, we can help them reduce their overwhelming feelings of guilt and hopelessness and fear. And then we need to create hope. Creating hope is, one, just by being with someone that's safe, gives them a feeling of hope. We also should be connecting them to resources, and if any community resources, if they have any family resources, whatever resources are available, we need to try to connect them. Caroline, will you put the next slide up? And this is where just this little quote, and Dr. Jeannie Brooks was one of the professors that accompanied us on this trip. Yeah, so the slide says, life doesn't end where the hurt started. So this is the hope. This is the hope that we need to instill in them, is to realize that even though they have experienced something very traumatic, life doesn't end there. It just doesn't. Life doesn't end where the hurt started. If you go to the next slide. Here we go. So trauma changes us, but trauma does not destroy us. And this right here is the message of hope. And although it is hard to fathom what these girls experience, it doesn't destroy them. It is not the end. It is not the end of life. There is hope. There is hope. There is progress. This is the hope that we need to create. And part of creating that is coming to believe it in our own hearts as well. So we'll just go ahead to the next slide, and actually do the slide of the little duck goose. As we met with the NGOs, they were given the opportunity to have some of us come to their organizations and work with the other workers. And some of them, there was one group that I was privileged to be part of that actually got to interface with some of the survivors. And this is a picture of us teaching the survivors something that brought joy into their life. Part of the reality, at least here in this situation, many of these girls had been impregnated or were rescued from intimate partner violence and brought into a safe home where we were teaching the NGO workers to, about the limbic system and about helping them create those neural pathways so that they could get out of the limbic system, that kind of roundabout, and get into the higher cortex, where they could think rationally and begin to truly make choices, not based on fear and shame and guilt, but based on logic and reasoning and safety and security. As we were invited to meet with some of the victims. And as we sat with them, it became very clear that they didn't know how to access joy. They didn't know how to get out of that limbic system. And as a result, many of them started to perpetuate the very things that they were rescued from. And it was very disturbing to them because they knew how much they hated the fear and the physical violence, and yet they found that that was their go-to response in their interactions, and especially with their children. And so one thing that we decided to do was to teach them a fun way to connect with their children. And that was to just play the simple game of Duck, Duck, Goose. And it was so touching to see as grown women, we sat in a circle, and the level of joy and laughter and happiness and just wholeness was tangible. They laughed and hooped and hollered and ran around, and they begged us to come back the next day to teach them more. So for one little moment, we were able to get them out of that limbic system and into the relational brain, or the higher cortex, where they really could feel safe. Part of, as we interface with them, that really the creating the calm, the safety, and the hope is the best thing that we can do for them. And then hopefully there will be people that they will have that will be skilled, that will help them learn ways to create opportunities to form those new neural pathways so that the trauma can end and a new life can begin. Now, as for those of us that do work with them, we do need to be very, very vigilant at our own self-care, because if we're not, then we won't be able to bless their lives in that same way. And the areas of self-care that we need to be cognizant of is, one, our physical self-care. And this is the same for the girls too. We need to teach them self-care as well, so that they can receive the same benefits that we receive. But physical self-care is huge. It involves diet, exercise, adequate sleep, even appropriate touch, which can be emotional too, but just the sensory input. All of those physical things are huge, and we need to make sure that we all take care of that. Deborah, are you wanting to say something?
Yes, I'm so overwhelmed and thankful for what you're bringing up. And I think that you've really mentioned something that I'm very grateful. We're going to have Akaleke speaking shortly after you, because you mentioned the necessity of having mentors, of having ways in which we can transition. And so Akaleke is going to speak a lot to that transitioning that he has been able to help with many different groups, many different organizations of people that have gone through violent extremism, people who have suffered conflict, people who've gone through all kinds of situations and have to be reintegrated. I want to also mention that your victims of human trafficking sometimes are not viewed as victims. They're viewed as criminals. The criminalization of the victim is something that is beyond understanding in the United States. And hopefully Christian will tell us a little bit more about other countries. But in the United States, what I see as a juvenile court attorney is that children who have no ability to consent to what is happening to them, nonetheless are being prosecuted as criminals for being involved in prostitution or whatever has happened to them. And that is a violence upon these young persons that is just incomprehensible. So I love that you're explaining to us that they can find their childhood again. There is a saying that all of us are entitled to a happy childhood. And as Laughter Lawyer USA, that uses therapeutic humor and laughter as a modality for healing, I always say that we can have that childhood. We can recreate that childhood now. So you're giving us that hope, and I'm so grateful. And you're also telling us that those who work with victims of violence need to be able to take care of ourselves. So in a nutshell, what would you advise people who are working with anyone who's fragile, even in their own family? What would you recommend as like the pretty much the basic information that you would want them to know?
Um, Really, I think the most important thing that we can do for ourselves and that we can teach others to do is proper self-care in the 5 areas: mental, physical, emotional, social, and spiritual. Um, and we're not here to fix people's problems. We aren't here to give them huge advice. We're our purpose is to empower them to be able to care for themselves and to be able to live a happy and fulfilling life, and to find joy in that life, and to have the hope.
Wonderful. Well, on that note, we're gonna end this part of the presentation. And Lana, I want to invite you again for a future courageous conversation on mental health and wellness and peace building, because I know that we still have so much more to share on this. We're now going to move on to Akaleke Christian Leke, a youth civil society activist from Cameroon. And I think he's going to bring an amazing understanding of what Lana has been talking about with regards to rehabilitation and the brain. Let me tell you some amazing things about this person that I have met online and have grown to admire from a distance. And I'm so excited and delighted that he's in the United States and that we were able to find the same time zone to be able to meet with each other. Um, he has transformed himself from a person who was growing up in violence into a peace advocate, using his experience of violence to prevent violent and extremist offenders in prisons and vulnerable young people from radicalization. He's he is an advocate for youth. He is a civil society activist from Cameroon, and he's created youth-friendly national and global policies in peace building. Akaleke serves as, this is among the many things he does, by the way, serves as the coordinator of the Commonwealth Youth Peace Ambassadors Network, which where he coordinates over 1,000 peace building organizations across the Commonwealth. In 2018, he was nominated the Young Person, Commonwealth Young Person of the Year, and in 2016. In 2018, he was named the Luxembourg Peace Prize winner. So, Akaleke, we are so honored to have you with us today. And we'd like to hear your story of what you have been doing in Cameroon. And I know that in 2016, you were also involved in the rescue of a number of people, a number of victims in Cameroon.
Thank you very much. Very much, Deborah. It's really a pleasure to finally get to talk with you and to join this amazing conversation. It came when I was traveling, and I told you I had to make it because it's very important to me personally. Because the whole issue of trafficking people falls in line with the kind of work which I've been involved in, because it has its consequences, which are both psychosocial, physically, and growing up and living in the African continent, where a lot of people are caught in the trafficking space because of the fact that they want to look for greener path. Maybe because our economy system is not the best, maybe because they cannot get jobs, and sometimes some feel that for them to be trafficked to be maybe maids in Kuwait or somewhere in the Middle East is much more better, than living back home where they have no job. I mean, these are some of the conversations which comes up. And personally, I involved in this a lot in 2016 after we had horrible cases of young Cameroonian girls in Kuwait who were caught in sex slavery, who were caught in really, really dehumanizing acts, because there are issues of racism. I remember talking to one of the girls, and they called him Kadama. And I think in Arabic, Kadama means slave. and we had videos, we had evidence of how they are mistreated, how they are beaten up, how they have sorry to say it, but group sex and a lot of issues which were so dehumanizing. And one of the things we understood about these young ladies is that the first thing is they were not very confident to speak to people, and that is part of the trauma which they find themselves in. There's an issue of trust, because usually these traffickers who are also young people, some of these traffickers I had the opportunity to speak to, I had the opportunity to do advocacy for their arrest and all of that. These are all young people who, in the trafficking business as well, it is because of the lack of opportunities, as they say. But there's no justification for any of this, and it is much more complex, because, for example, in 2016, while we were trying to bring back the girls who found themselves in this horrible situation, the same moment at the airports, there were young girls who were being trafficked at the same moment. So it's, the nexus of it is the connection between the economic situation of our countries where we live in and the mentality of just traveling abroad, just being in an aircraft to travel to a next place. It means a lot to them because that is how the mindsets have been set. But in the time of working with them and with my experience working with young people from other countries, listening from other stories, and working directly with people who, because of situations, they have been forced either to violence, they have been forced either to acts of terror, which sometimes we might term them to be very bad people. But we always ask ourselves why, because as a peace builder, we try to look at these reasons. What is pushing them, what is pulling them, what is making them feel they could find themselves there, what makes voluntary and involuntary use of these young persons, especially women, because sometimes I was speaking to one of these young girls who found herself there, and she tried to explain to me that at home she's young, she's the first child of the family, and there was this pressure at home from the mom. She's not getting married, she can't afford a good job, she can't offer anything. What do you do? And with such a pressure, she found herself being trafficked. And the whole gaining of income from this come from two sides, from the buyer and from the victim itself. So we have victims pay approximately about 2,000 to $3,000 for them to travel, and at the end of the day, they find themselves to be victims. And the buyers themselves also pay these traffickers. So the traffickers make money from two angles. And speaking to one of these traffickers, he explained to us that, he goes online on social media, for example, he has a Facebook group, and there he contacts people who are willing to get those to serve them. And sometimes they themselves are not aware of how horrible these situations should be, but because they are also very greedy, they give a blind eye to it. So in 2016, my personal experience, when we had these reports, it was all over social media. And these were young people. And at the same time, I serve as the Cameroon's youth ambassador to the Commonwealth, which gave me the capacity to be able to advocate on behalf of young people nationally, not just as a civil society, but from a diplomatic standpoint. So when this happened, one of the things which we did was try to get in contact with these girls. And one of the cases we had, she's a young lady. She has a master's degree from a university in Norway and came back to Cameroon and found herself in this, trapped in this. And speaking to how she was very intelligent, very knowledgeable, but she found herself there. And this went a long way to destroy some of the myths which people have about trafficking in the African continent, where they talk about all your educational status or even your financial status. But this young lady was not poor nor was uneducated. She was perfectly educated, but it demonstrates some form of luring people into this nets, some kind of sweet talking of people about the opportunities out there. And that is how she was lured into this. And speaking to her, while she was in Kuwait, she shared pictures. Her travel documents were seized. She had no one to speak to, and it was so complex. And another part of the victimization that she felt, which I would like to highlight, is also those who respond to these challenges. Sometimes in responding, we victimize these individuals. She shared a situation where when she spoke to an activist, the next second she found her picture and her story on the internet without her consent. she felt more victimized, she felt stigmatized, and she felt worse and could not speak to anyone. I mean, these are some of the challenges in the response that we need to think of. We need to think about doing no harm to these people in trying to solve their problems, because we are not just coming to pull them out of the challenges that they have, but these are people who have capacity, who have the potential of becoming much more better than where they find themselves. So in speaking to her, and when she gave us all the details, the first thing which we did was around leadership. We spoke to her. Okay, you've been able to speak to us. We are aware you know others. We want you to be the leader of this conversation. We want you to connect other young girls and add them into the group. So we had a Facebook group where we were speaking to a set of about 20 of these young women who found themselves in court. And every day we speak to them and we try to find out what the situation was. And unfortunately for them, we didn't have an embassy in Kuwait. The closest embassy was in Saudi Arabia, making it very difficult. So my colleagues and I, we decided to launch a petition, a national petition, where our target was to get 10,000 young people to sign the petition, both offline and online, to ask the government to take action. Because the video surfaced on social media, there was a lot of talking, but there was no action. So when we had these petition, it started online, and later we had advocacy meetings with some members of government, with the governor, at the Prime Minister's office, and also at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the person who is in charge of Cameroonians abroad. And when we had this conversation, the first thing is the government did not have evidence, because a lot of these children or young people trafficked, they do not have confidence to speak to government officials. And since the government is so bureaucratic, they do not have access to such information. So when we provided them this information, and also many other organizations were into the advocacy, they sent information, real detail and fact. Fortunately, the government sent a team of 4 people who traveled to Kuwait to look at the situation. It was a fact-finding mission. And when they traveled, and the first thing was trying to know who are the traffickers back home. And we came to find out that they are also young boys, mostly young boys, but they had young girls who were recruiting for them. And when I look at this and working in the space of terrorism, I see like a relationship where the ringleaders of terrorist movement have to use young women to also recruit young women. It's so similar, and it really matches how this connection is. And they have young ladies who are in Kuwait, who could be in a fairer situation and will tell very good stories. Oh, everything is very fine. When you get here, it's gonna be so cool. But when you get there, your documents are seized and all of that. So this mission went to Kuwait, and it had some few diplomatic tensions. And we had fellow diplomats from our embassy in Saudi Arabia that joined the team, and they met with members of the Kuwaiti government. And we also realized that the institutions in Kuwait claimed they were not aware of such happening. So they claim their institutions have laws which condemns that, but people are actually practicing that like it's a routine, it's a habit. And so
I'd
at
like
the end
to
of the day, we had 20 of these young women. Yeah,
go ahead.
just yeah, it's okay.
No, please go ahead and finish.
Deborah, yeah, you want to
Yes.
say something?
No, please let me not interrupt
Yeah.
your
So
story.
at the end of so at the end of the day, we had 20 of these young women who came back to Cameroon. And when they came back to Cameroon, the first government response is they gave them a temporary shelter. We have a not really an established, but the government responds to every young person who has been trafficked, be it nationally or internationally, because the trafficking also takes place nationally. So there was a temporary shelter which was provided for them, and in that temporary shelter, we had reintegration programs which were done for them, which included skills building, vocational skills, psychosocial support, and provision of household materials and some financial support. And this work was done between the government and the International Organization of Migration as well. So the OMA, they worked with the government to provide this support. So, I mean, this was the experience I had from speaking with the ladies who found themselves where they are, to building their confidence, to ensuring that government was able to take action, because it is something which is very important, involving the government in the process, because sometimes It takes a lot of diplomatic relationship for this to happen, and ensuring that they are back and they are given an alternative, and finally they find themselves reintegrated into communities without any stigma and ready to live a new life. So this is, the experience which I've had specifically.
And that's an extraordinary experience with an amazing outcome. It is a fabulous, fabulous story of hope and really promise. But it took an extraordinary person like you to be able to coordinate it all and get it all together. I think that one of the things that you mentioned that there's a lot of parallels with violent extremism and recruitment. And we want to emphasize in this awareness day that what happens with the trafficking of persons is fraud. It is coercion. It is a way of tricking people into this kind of lifestyle. Not everybody understands that, and I think that's where the criminalization comes in. I think another thing that we learned today with Lana is the effect on the brain when you've been traumatized, when you've been abused, when you've been lied to. And Lana made it very clear to us that these individuals may not be thinking as clearly, or may not be, or the trauma has affected them to such a point that they may not be reacting appropriately. So we have to be very careful with our judgments. And what I love about your story of success is that not only do you have the reintegration process, but you've got government, you've got psychosocial help, you've got all kinds of things coming together. And that is a tremendous victory. And I really, really want to commend you for that. And that is what we're trying to do here with this awareness program. We're trying to show how in Iceland, there was a converging of many, many things that helped to help these victims and to also punish the perpetrators. Because what you've done is help the victims, but now there's that secondary portion of it, which is what do we do with the perpetrators? What I'd like to do, Caroline, if it's okay with you, is go ahead into our little comic strip video and then have Lana and Akaleke comment about what do we do about the perpetrator after this video, because we've heard this tremendous victory story, and I'm just so excited. One person can make a difference, and we're seeing that with you, Akaleke, and we're very grateful. Lana, you're teaching us so much about what trauma can do to us as an individual, and now we've got to see what are we going to do about these people who have caused this trauma.
Human trafficking. The problem is so vast, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime has suggested that human trafficking is now set to outpace both the drugs and arms trade as the largest illicit industry in the world. We need a solution that's bigger than the problem. Law enforcement, government agencies, and non-governmental organizations by themselves are not big enough to solve this problem. What we need is a civilian army bigger than the army of buyers. The statistics of horrors create despair. Until you meet Gudrun Jónsdóttir from Iceland. Gudrun stepped onto the UN stage and yelled, "Enough! In Iceland, we just don't sit around whining about all these things. We get off the couch and do something." In Iceland, they fought for 10 years to pass the laws which decriminalized the prostituted person but criminalized the buyer and the seller. On the day the law passed, the Icelandic women gathered for a champagne toast, their favorite thing to do. Simultaneously on national television, the Icelandic police chief announced, "This is the stupidest law I've ever heard. I don't have the staff, the resources. Forget it." Over their champagne, the Icelandic women once again said, "Enough! We've tried to play by the rules. Now we're going to take matters into our own hands." Operation Big Sister was born. These sisters decided if sellers can buy anonymous phones and place ads in the paper and online, why can't we? So they placed decoy ads, and within an hour of placing their first ad, they received over 300 phone calls. They'd answer the phone, "Big sister is watching you," or "Here's the address," and they'd send them to the police chief's house for services. They began to destabilize the sex trade in Iceland. When men called to buy sex, they didn't know whether they would get their mother, wife, sister, or girlfriend on the phone. The Big Sisters invited all the buyers to a press conference, telling them that it was about hot models from Eastern Europe. They all wore neon burqas to protect their anonymity and perpetuate their power, and with the media following them, they marched to the police chief's office and handed him a list of 144 names, phone numbers, and email addresses of buyers of sex. 1 week later, the Icelandic government assigned 25 million krona to create a special police task force for ending human trafficking in Iceland. Multiple buyers and their first traffickers of prostitution were arrested and prosecuted. In addition to their neon burqas, the Big Sisters developed another part of their clothing line, "I Am Responsible Underwear for Men," which the police chief proudly wears on the outside of his police uniform. Individuals that care when we come together change the world. We would like to offer you an Operation Big Sister champagne toast and an invitation to join our civilian army. Please visit OperationBigSister.com and go to our Take Action page to learn how you, with no personal risk and very little time, energy, and money, can contribute to the efforts to uplift the dignity of every human being and end what President Jimmy Carter calls the greatest human rights violation in the history of humankind. Thank you for being a big sister or big brother.
So I have to say that Akaleke's model of success was tremendous with regards to rescuing the victims, reintegrating the victims, and helping them to get back on their feet again. But what I would like to know now is, what are we going to do about the perpetrators? And I think the Big Sisters model has a lot of ideas. They've got an action page, and in a minute we're going to go towards the action page and look at things, and I'll have Lana and Akaleke look at the action page and tell me their thoughts about it. But Lana, when you were in Cambodia and in Thailand, I think you were aware that of something that maybe a lot of people in the United States are not aware of. 25% of the tourism that goes on to get that kind of those kind of favors and that kind of trafficking is coming from the United States, men in the United States that are coming into Cambodia and Thailand. And they're doing that. Also, a fact that people don't know very much, because I think when we're in the United States, we think it's a problem outside of the United States, but we're talking about white males, over 50 that are engaging in this. And there are tremendous links with pornography. There's a lot of links with social media. So Lana, were you able to learn anything about what happens to the perpetrators, or were you only just working with the victims?
We only worked with the victims. The thing that we did learn is, and this is part of what keeps it going for the victims as well, is in a weekend they can earn a year's worth of money. In Cambodia, the average annual income is $100 a month. And so, it's a tricky part of the whole system. If we can figure out a way to punish the consumers, the men, these wealthy American men that go over there and consume, that would go a long way.
And yeah,
At this
I didn't
point,
mean to
I mean,
focus only on American men because we're seeing a lot of wealthy men all over the world.
Right.
And we're also seeing that 30% of the victims are children, 35, and then 35% are young boys. So we're seeing that this crosses genders. Akeleke, I wanted to ask you, in Africa, how does it work with regards to the perpetrators? And I also wanted to ask you about the parallels to violent extremism. The drivers for this are really marginalization, poverty, and I think it's the same thing with regards to trafficking, is it not?
Yeah, I think let me start with the parallel. I think it's very connected, considering that the one thing about recruitment in violent extremism is it's about lies, it's about deception, it's about faking. And this is one thing which is the same, which I realized in trafficking, because the recruiters most often do know that these people are being trafficked, and they do not tell the victims, and they look for also sometimes even on the status. So the recruitment is usually done online on social media, WhatsApp conversation, Facebook. So sometimes the profile pictures you see it's a young lady, and they'll call you. It's a female voice, and you have the whole conversation and all of that. And the relationship it's so parallel. Looking at violent extremism, and if you look at the drivers, these young ladies who find themselves being recruited, it's either issues about poverty or issues about the identity. Identity is really a major issue. Sometimes it's from peer pressure. Because back in Africa, the zeal to travel abroad or just to enter an aircraft and travel, it makes a lot of people agitated. And when they hear that, they don't think about two things. They only realize that they have been trapped in something which they didn't bargain for. Just like violent extremism, where people are recruited and they find themselves only perpetrating an act which they never signed for. It's so common. And when it comes to perpetrators in my country, for example, the state takes it very, very seriously. Personally, I've been part of processes of tracking some of these perpetrators online, because on social media, for example, Facebook, they use fake profiles. So we try to go backdoor at real people behind these profiles. And I remember a case where the police had to arrest the person. What happened was that a call was made to this guy to inform him that it's a client. You know him. Oh, I want to travel. I heard you're doing it, and let's meet somewhere. And when he came to meet his client, unfortunately for him, it was the police, and he was arrested. And to us, it's a capital crime as well. Trafficking in person is a capital crime, because our government really respects international conventions and all of that. So when you are arrested, you are tried from between 5 to 10 years imprisonment, and sometimes depending on the several counts that you have, because we've had cases where you have counts of abuse of confidence and others which fits in that. So we've had some of them who have been tried from 5 to 10 years and even 15 years, and with fines to pay. Also, the government strategy is also very weak, and that's why civil society is very important, because we've had cases where people have gone scot-free, either because of corruption, because they have amassed a lot of wealth from these, so they are easy to bribe people. And so we've had this loophole. But nationally, people understand that it is a crime to actually traffic in persons. We have agencies which are established, which has an office space and everything, but then they take part in trafficking. So some of these have been closed. Sometimes the government go through the flight agency that book the flight for the victim to travel, to be able to track the person who bought the flight. So I think it's a process which our country is it's getting to understand. Unfortunately, at this moment, it's a bit difficult because we are trapped in several conflicts in the English-speaking regions, conflict of Boko Haram in the far north. So the interest in this conversation has reduced. But support from U.S. Embassy, for example, from British High Commission and other international partners in Cameroon are really supporting this process to train even government officials on how to track the perpetrators. And we've had over 20 to 50 of them who are currently behind bars for committing these acts. So it is something which it's very serious, and we are doing everything every day to prosecute them and ensure that they have the proper sentence for the crimes.
Oh, that's heartening for me. The UN ODC statistics are showing that violence definitely is conflict, areas of conflicts and violence is definitely linked to this. So maybe there will be more interest as we start understanding the relationship of conflict areas and violence, because we have people that are going to be taken to slavery for labor, for child soldiers, for marriage, child marriages. I mean, we have multiple things that can be going on in a parallel way in a violent extremist society. So I think that we're starting to see how everything is interrelated. I'd like to end our presentation with a note of action, because one person can make a difference, and we've certainly seen that today with everything that Akeleke has told us, and also with regards to what each and every one of us can do. Lana made a difference when she went to Thailand and Cambodia. I'm making a difference by toasting the women of Iceland. But this website, I would like to direct you both to it and have your comments on it. If Caroline, if you could put the action page of the Operation Big Sister website, I'd like the world to know that this is a wonderful resource for anyone, anywhere in the world. And in this action page, we talk about making a civilian army to end trafficking. And I want you to look at the circle there and see if there's any one particular subject matter. Caroline, if you can kind of highlight the subject matters in the circle there. Is there any subject matter that you might want to click on, that you might be interested in? Lana, which one would you click on?
I would probably click in either I am a parent or I work in health or social services.
Well, let's do I'm a parent. Caroline, let's click on I'm a parent and see what that says for someone who's a parent who would like to know what to do to join the civilian army. So when we click on that I'm a parent, it should lead us to a link. And let's see. It tells, oh, look, as a parent, it's asking you, are you dealing with a high school? Do you have a daughter? Do you have a son? Are you talking about prevention from ages 4 to 18 or a high school student? And would you like to look at a parenting manual? How's that for some options? Lana?
That's great.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
And really, you know, we talk about the ending the buyers, and really so much of that prevention comes in the home with how the children are being taught.
Absolutely. And especially with regards to social media, as Akeleke mentioned, how social media is something we could really, and there are some wonderful preventative programs that Parent Manual helps teach about that. Akeleke, what do you see on this list that you might be interested in clicking on?
I'm trying to look. It's a bit faint, I guess.
Well, we have I'm addicted to porn. I'm a guy who wants to help. I'm a lawyer. I'm a truck driver. We can pick any one of those subjects. I think since you're a guy.
I'm a guy who wants to help.
Yeah, let's see what I'm a guy who wants to help says.
Yeah.
All right. And Caroline, what do we have? I can't read that very well what those two subjects are. You can host an event or you can intercept buyers. Wow. So if you're a guy and you want to learn more, you can learn about how to intercept buyers or how to hold an event to end trafficking. I would like to look at, oh, okay, good. You clicked on one of them? Great. Let's see where it takes us. And this shows you how easy and manageable this website is for the average person. Caroline, I'm interested in the porn. A person who's addicted to porn, what would happen to them, and why do we even have it listed in this list? Why? So right now we see that this is a very interactive. What do you think, Lana and Ekaleke? Do you think of this as a good resource for the average person to be able to find some answers as to what they can do individually?
Oh, absolutely.
I think I amazing. The graphics, graphics makes it easier for people to have access. I think it's amazing.
Yes, and so that's why I want to thank you so much for joining me in this Big Sister Awareness program. You've given us an idea of what's going on around the world, and I hope I'm giving you an idea of at least one resource where we can fight this, and many others. Each and every one of us is doing it in our own way, but I wanted you to become aware of this website and to become aware of this program. There will be a movie that's going to be coming out on the Big Sisters, and I really felt an intrigue to look at I'm addicted to porn. And so when I did, and when I clicked on it, as an addiction recovery facilitator myself, it was an interesting thing because it links you to a website called The New Drug, Fight the New Drug. As a matter of fact, it's just popping up right now. And Fight the New Drug is actually a non-religious website, and it talks an awful lot, Lana, you would like this, an awful lot about the neuroscience of addiction. So it really gives some very... So as we are coming to an end of our presentation, because we are going to be running out of time, I want everyone to be aware that there are resources all over the world that we can do. We have a national trafficking line. And for those of you who are going to be tuning in for today, June 30th, the World Day Against Trafficking in Persons, we are going to be doing further watch parties and talking more about what Lana Smith and Akaleke have brought up in today's presentation. So the conversation will not end with just this Zoom conversation. We're going to continue to have a courageous conversation on World Day Against Trafficking in Persons on Facebook and Instagram throughout the day. Lana, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and telling us about what we can do to understand victims of trafficking and how we can, we haven't even delved enough on the first aid. And I think that there may come a time, Akaleke, when we can talk to you as well about what it means for you as a great peace builder to take care of yourself so that you can continue to take care of others. Because, self-care for the peace builder is something that we cannot ignore while we're going out and helping others. Is there anything that either one of you would like to end today's presentation with? I want to thank you both extremely from the bottom of my heart for coming and being a part of this. I regret that we don't have any more time on our Zoom meeting to go into more details, but I hope that we can follow this courageous conversation in the future. So is there anything that you would like to end our day in, and what kind of a note you would like to end it on? Who'd like to go first?
I would like to go first. Yeah, I would just like to say that I, as a young person, I believe a lot in our capacity to be able to drive change, to influence, issues which usually we think it's not in our control. So I just want to say that you, as a single person, you can do it. because I started something, and today we've been able to change a lot of lives. You just need to start from somewhere. When you see it, see it, say something, as it's always said in the metro in the UK. So thank you very much. It was really a huge pleasure to join this conversation, and I believe that there's so much more we can do. And I'm so happy to meet Lena. Lana, I think your experience is so amazing, and I'm sure we're going to connect much more after this. Thank you very much.
And Caroline, thank you so
Yes,
much for helping
it's
us.
nice to meet you as well.
Yes.
And thank you, Deborah, for the invitation to be on. And I think there's hope, and I think that every one of us, and through the Big Sisters organization, we can all just do a little bit every day to help make a huge difference in the world.
Yes. So Caroline, you've been listening very quietly and watching us. Is there any comment that you would like to add to our group? You've been our silent partner. Unmute. You have to unmute yourself.
I'm so grateful that you guys allowed me to do the background technology, and hopefully it went smoothly, but I'm grateful that I got to hear from each one of you guys. You had such amazing points. I was also taking personal notes as a mother and as a person who spends a lot of time online. I have a chronic illness, and so I reach out to a lot of specifically women who suffer from invisible illnesses and chronic illnesses, and so I understand the importance of self-care and mental care, and I think that this is something that women who sit at home who are sick, or me as we call ourselves chronic illness warriors, sometimes we're on social media a lot because we're home, we're in bed, we're not feeling well, and I think this is something that we can do from home. We can make a difference. We can use technology to spread awareness to this, and that was what I took out of it. I thought I can do things. So I'm really grateful for what you guys said, and I'm grateful I was a chance to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you very, very much, each and every one of you, for participating in this day. I hope, Caroline, you've got a nice, good group picture of us. And I want to thank you for joining us in our first in a series. Great. Our first in a series of courageous conversations, and thank the two wonderful courage keepers who have spoken with us, Lana Smith and Akaleke Christian Leke. We appreciate you, we thank you, and we wish you well. And we want to remind everyone that if you did listen today, or you are going to be a part of it, to make sure to hashtag end trafficking, and also link to Operation Big Sister and any other hashtag that you can possibly think of that will help raise awareness today in this very important subject. On behalf of Courage Keepers, I want to thank each and every one of you for attending, and hope that we can do this again soon.